If you've ever wondered what people are talking about when they say cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, you're in the right place. So today we're going to give you the basics with a baseline so that you can go learn more and go deeper down the rabbit hole. Probably the first place to start is just in why would anybody ever do this stuff and what's the point of it? And I'm reminded of one of the pieces of the puzzle here when it comes to the setup for why crypto is doing what it's doing. And I like these words here specifically. We think about buying coffee or whatever with crypto, but banks, governments, DeFi collectives using financial technologies to solve cross-border payments, inventing a new future, disintermediating SWIFT and the DTCC. This is the ambitions of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And it really starts with peer-to-peer technology and the removal of trusted centralized entities. Lucas, you ready to talk about cryptocurrency today?
Absolutely. And I think starting a conversation with understanding that it is about communication. It's about secured and trusted communication, and communication that is trusted by those engaging in it and supported by those engaging in it. It's very different than like you said, Swift. And for those who don't know, Swift is the international communication network that payments are sent on. That is was created by the United States, and is what many countries use to send payments from country to country and from bank to bank. And there are growing alternatives. We hear about BRICS, and BRICS now has their own communication system, financial network called BRICS Pay. In the United States, we use Fedwire. But all of you know, if you're not putting gold or silver or apples or oranges in a bag and trotting them on over to somebody, you're communicating what your accounts are. And to do so, you have to have a communication network to do that. And when we talk about cryptocurrency, part of that notion is how can you do this peer to peer and make sure that it's secure and trusted.
And the peer-to-peer technology that sort of is the grandfather of all this stuff. And there's a graphic that I like to present when we're first thinking about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin is what it took to get us to the point where we would actually have access to technology like this. One of the foundational pieces here is BitTorrent, which was created by Bram Cohen. You see this at the bottom here in 2001. It was really one of the pioneering and very popularizing peer-to-peer technologies that existed, and it really presaged a lot of what we would do with peer-to-peer technology later. So invented by Bram Cohen, a famous cryptographer, and paved the way towards what we're doing, because without some sort of peer-to-peer network, it's really hard to envision how you could have not a trusted third party. How could you get rid of a centralized entity that you're talking to if you don't have some sense of that you could do this with a swarm, or that you could do it with some sort of a computer network that isn't being gated or mitigated by a centralized broker. So it's really key to what cryptocurrency is all about, is peer to peer. And I think getting into how does it actually work is a good next step. So let's talk about how you actually get to having a peer-to-peer network. Clearly, we need some computers. So what is the computer doing, and what do we call that computer that's running this network?
As we get into that, I think it's also important to begin to distinguish, whenever we're talking about cryptography, there's both the transmission security and also the consensus security. So what we just talked about largely is the notion of being able to transmit information and for that to be secured. And that's where we get the cryptography. But then once you have that ability, you have to start thinking about why would people participate in that, and also how do you make sure that the information that many people when contributing to a network, they agree on the information, and how do you select the correct information? And that's whenever we get into consensus. Go ahead, Grant.
So that first piece of technology that you need to run a cryptocurrency or a Bitcoin node, it's what we would refer to as a full node. So the full node is the piece of software that is holding on to the database and is talking to the peer-to-peer network. So there are other computers that are going to talk to you, and in this interaction with these other computers, what's happening is they are propagating a database and a mempool. So these are kind of the two foundational pieces of technology that are happening. Is you've got this distributed ledger, or you have this database, and that's where all of the crypto is stored. So if somebody says, I have some crypto, and you don't really understand what they mean when they say they have some cryptocurrency, it means that they have a little piece of the database that is this thing that's being replicated by these computers. So there's this peer-to-peer network. They are all intercommunicating across the entire planet, and they have this database, and that database is the thing that tells you who owns what. Traditionally, that database has been owned by a centralized entity, your bank or the Federal Reserve or your particular country. They know how much money exists. They are the ones that are issuing the money. They are creating it. But in a peer-to-peer network, there is no centralized entity. The database exists on all these different little computers that are out there running, and they are participating in the replication of that database. And some of the computers are participating in the consensus mechanism. I think for today, we're going to focus more on what is crypto and how does this stuff works, and maybe stay away from how does the consensus mechanism work, because that gets into mining and it's sort of a completely different part of the problem that you need to solve. So let's stay focused on what does it mean to actually have coins, and what are wallets, and that'll be sort of the focus for today. So the inbound and outbound connections that are happening, what are they actually doing? Well, they're replicating things called blocks. So a block is a chunk of data that says, here are the payments that are happening. So Lucas is paying Rusty, Rusty is paying somebody else, I'm paying Lucas. All of these I paid somebody are stored inside of the blockchain database, and they are represented in blocks. So once all of these payment considerations are made, they're swooped up and put into the database, and that database is not changeable. So anything that's happened in the past, it happened, and we call that immutable. Like that means that things can't change. So things that happen in the past must have occurred, and they must always stay that way. And there's some special cryptographic tricks that have been put in place to ensure that things that happen in the past never get changed by some centralized entity. If you've ever experienced something where all of a sudden it seems like something has changed, and you didn't remember it being the same way that it was, that's mutability. That means that things can change, and usually centralized entities have the power to do that. They can just go into the database and fiddle around with something, and they can change something, and that happens all the time. But with a public ledger and with cryptocurrencies particularly, they leverage this immutability. And so inside the blockchain, inside the database, things that happened in the past never change, and there are special cryptographic hashes and computations that occur that ensure that that's correct. And so part of what your full node is doing is ensuring that nothing has changed. If you were to go in and make a change to one of these blocks, and then you were to tell the entire network, hey, this is the correct block, everyone in the network could look at that thing that you have told them, and they'd say, well, that actually doesn't work. It does not compute correctly. And since it doesn't, it would reject it. So this is fundamentally what the full node is doing. It's having these interconnections It is looking at everything that everyone wants to do inside the network as far as what coins are being spent. And so it's the full node, the database, and the mempool are the kind of key first pieces of technology that we need to talk about.
And is it go ahead if you're changing, but I thought maybe you might talk about who can participate in those nodes and the difference between proof of stake and proof of work and what that means. Looks like that's where you're headed.
Yeah, so let's maybe just talk a little bit about what the underlying technology is that's allowing us to arrive at these blocks. So in Bitcoin, we're using proof of work, and that means that you have to do a certain amount of computation to be able to create one of these blocks. So the block that you're creating is all of those transactions that have occurred. So that block of transactions has to be validated and it has to be written to the blockchain. In a peer-to-peer network, it's not obvious who would be allowed to write to the blockchain, who would be allowed to put something into the database. And so the innovation here was, well, you're going to only be able to write to that database when you've proven that you've done a certain amount of work. So the computer that is out there running the full node is coupled with this ability to do these computations. And when any particular participant in that part of the blockchain process has solved the computation in a very particular way, then they can look at the existing set of transactions that have been proposed. So that's what the mempool is. It's that part of the blockchain where everyone is waiting for their transaction to get confirmed, and they go pick transactions in there that make them the most money, and then they write that to the blockchain, and then they get the reward for doing that particular piece. So everyone is trying to do this in the network, and only one participant in the network is going to be able to do it fast enough. So the first one who finds that solution is going to be able to make the next block. They get the block reward, and that's how the currency is actually created within the system. Because that's the other thing you have to ask is, well, who has these coins? The ones who have the coins within the crypto network is the one who did the work, the one who earned it. So all coins within the Bitcoin network have been earned by the people who have been doing the proof of work computation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's also important to, part of the reason that if you're going to have a peer-to-peer network, that this concept of proof of work was very important, was because it allows for it allows for I don't want to say anonymous, but unknown entities to join and participate in that network. And that is, if you think about how our banking system or other communication networks exist, those entities are known beforehand, and this is where you get into notions of proof of stake and how that gets replicated um, to add security to a quasi public network. But proof of work was an interesting innovation that gave us the ability to have unknown entities join into a peer-to-peer network.
Yeah, that you're right. I didn't really speak to that too much. So it's a public peer-to-peer network. So anyone can participate in it. There is no centralized entity that's saying you can't have the ledger or you can't start. So if you just connect to the swarm will just start coughing up data. You start making requests to these full nodes and you say, I need block 1 and I need block 2 and I need block 3, and the network just starts handing them out. So that's part of the function of the network, is just to publicly give up the data and serve it out to anyone that asks for it. That it's free, it's open, and the network just will start handing out the data to anyone that comes online. So if you were to spin up one of these full nodes at your house, and you download the software and you get it installed and you connect it to the swarm, it'll just start asking for blocks from the network, and the network will just start giving it to you. That's part of the altruism of the network, I guess, is that it's public and it just wants to replicate itself. It's self-perpetuating in some sense that way. All right, I think we should take a minute to talk about how these transactions get into the network itself. So it's through a function called the mempool. So the mempool is all of the transactions which are currently waiting to be put into a block. So everything that is not yet been written to a block, but that is properly formed, sits in the mempool. And the mempool is this waiting area where transactions will eventually make it into the blockchain. So this is the special mechanism within the full node where you say, I want to pay Lucas some amount of Bitcoin, like maybe $5 worth of Bitcoin. And it sits in the mempool until the next block is created. So all of that hashing, that computation that's going on in the Bitcoin network, what it will do is to find things that are in the mempool that make it the most money. So when you do a transaction, you put a small amount of crypto onto your transaction, and this is the bribe that you're going to pay who's ever doing the work to have your transaction included. So that fee is paid to the entity that makes the block. So if you make the block, you're going to try to maximize the amount of value that you can by picking the transactions that have the highest fees associated with it. So this is a mechanism whereby you can bid for block space. So block space is very limited in the world of Bitcoin. Some cryptocurrencies have more block space, and they tend to be less valuable. So the thing that you're fundamentally valuing with a crypto, the fundamental use of a crypto is for buying space in the database. And so the fee that you pay is based on how many people are at that point in time trying to get block space at that particular time. So if the network is really, really busy, it might be that fees are really high if you want to get your transaction through. But if there's not a lot of congestion on the network, if there isn't a lot of things going on, then fees could be really low. This is a lot like Uber pricing. You know, if you've ever been at a very busy event and everybody's trying to get a car at the same time, the fees tend to go up and the rides get more expensive. But if you're at a place where, and a time where there's not a lot of pressure on trying to get a ride, then the fees go down. It's very similar on cryptocurrency networks that have full blocks and for constrained block space, especially like Bitcoin. So that's largely what drives the fees. And then the fees are paid to the miner when they create the block, and they want to maximize the amount of value that they get. So not only do they get the block reward, but they get all the fees that they put. They get all the fee that is associated with the transactions that were pulled out of the mempool. So that's the kind of fundamentals of how your transaction goes from being in a pending state to a confirmed state and actually in the blockchain.
And you might hear in some blockchains, or some people also refer to this as gas. And you said bribe earlier. Maybe there's some negative connotations with that. I guess something I wanted to point out is, if you think about whenever you want to send money to a friend in a foreign country and you go to Western Union or your bank, you're going to pay a fee to send that money, because there's also there is some cost to participating in maintaining these communication networks, and that is true when there are third parties with the existing systems that we have in the world, and that's true whenever we're using technology like computers and the internet to make an alternative. So you could call it a tax, a bribe, gas, whatever, but there is some cost to submitting and being able to send these transactions. And sometimes you can also manipulate or raise that cost so you can beat other people in the line. You referred to Uber. and this notion of congestion pricing, and some people are willing to pay more. So these are all aspects that are may vary from blockchain to blockchain, but are fundamental in the way that they work.
So I think the next thing that we need to talk about is, how do you actually pay somebody? Like, what does it mean to pay another person on a blockchain? In the world of banking, you go to your bank, you go through this extended process of setting up an account, and finally, at the end of that entire process, they give you an account number, which can then be printed on a check, or it can be associated with your debit card, or whatever. But you have some number, and that is how the bank keeps track of money that is yours, right? I mean, that's fundamentally how that works. Is you've got some account number, and the bank says this account has this balance. Well, in a peer-to-peer network, there is no centralized entity that can give you an account number. You have to create one for yourself. And so the way that this works is commonly done through what is known as an HD wallet. And with a wallet, Lucas, I think you said something really profound, is that a wallet is not, in the world of crypto, is not something you carry around with you, but it's something that lives as part of the Bitcoin network itself. It's part of the database. What you have is a set of keys that allow you to move those coins and that amount of cryptocurrency that you own. You have control over it. So it's the keys that you keep private to yourself that is really the important thing. And your wallet is commonly referred to as this way that you find addresses, make addresses, and then are able to do this keys stuff that allows you to move those coins around.
Yeah, be very wary, and this is something that I that we when we talk about wallets, I think wallets are a poor metaphor for what's actually occurring. Um, I like to call them foyers, but nobody knows what that is. Ports, because the blockchain, or because the database is public and it always exists. Whenever we create a landing pad where we can interact with it um, and be able to send things and whatnot, that always exists. And so when you hear cold wallets, or hot wallets, or just wallet period, it's not something that you can fold up and put in your pocket and secure physically away. Your keys you can secure physically away, or so they're not held uh, in anything that's accessible by a network. But the wallet always exists there, and so people need to be very wary of that, and conscious of the difference between keys and wallets.
Right. So the way that this works is, you have this. If you've been exposed to crypto and somebody would tell you you have these 12 words or whatever, the words are some randomness. So in this diagram, it shows you there's some entropy, this random thing that has happened. Then from that, you can express that in a thing that's rememberable. So the thing that's rememberable is why we say mnemonic, because this comes from like mnemonic device. Like, how can you remember somebody's name, or how can you remember a poem, or a book, or something like that? Oftentimes there is a technique to doing this, and that technique for being able to easily remember things is a mnemonic. And so what we have is, we have 12 words that come together that represent this entropy. So you don't need the mnemonic phrase if you can just remember the entropy. But this is kind of hard for humans to remember, because it's a bunch of ones and zeros, or it's some very large number. So the way that we do that is we break that up into words that are a little bit easier to remember, because we are creatures of language. We have oftentimes, in times past, traded stories around the campfire or whatever, and those people that could tell stories were more successful. And so we're creatures of words, and so words are, in our world, much easier to remember and deal with. So this is commonly the way that we represent the entropy. And so from that entropy, we can make a whole bunch of addresses. And so that process of being able to create addresses where someone can pay you is a repeatable process given the exact entropy. So if you were to give it that same seed then you can create all of the keys that are going to be associated with your account. And so crypto is fundamentally using something called public-private key crypto. And so something that is locked with a public key can be unlocked with a private key. So you tell the world about the public key, and that's what people use to pay you. So they create some coins out there with your public key, and then when you are ready to unlock the value of that coin, say send it to somebody else and they're going to give you something of equal exchange of value, then you unlock the coin with your private key and you take some amount of whatever coin that you've got and you make a change back coin to yourself and you send whatever amount that you want to somebody else, which is recorded in the public ledger, enacted through the mempool, and then you have then locked it to whatever public key they told you. So that's what the address fundamentally is it's some way that a public-private key system has been represented. And there are some number of different ways that this can actually occur as far as the different ways that you can pay people. So there's some nuance to how that works, but fundamentally you can think about it like someone has some public key somewhere that was a result of them doing this same process, and then you pay it to their public key, and because they have the private key, they're able to move it whenever they want to. And that's what ownership of a specific coin means, is it means they have the ability at some point in the future to unlock that coin and send the value to somebody else. That's what it means to own some crypto. You have to have control of the private keys. And so that's why some people will say the phrase, not your keys, not your crypto, because if you don't have control of the private keys, you're not fundamentally in control of it, because at some point in the future, you can't move that coin when you want to. So if you are using some sort of a centralized custodian, like a centralized exchange, they're the ones that are actually in control of the keys, and you are just like having an account that is controlled by them, and they are doing all of this process for you. So this is fundamentally what Coinbase is doing. It's what Kraken is doing. They are making these special places to hold on to the money, and you only actually take control of the crypto when you withdraw and you say, here's the address where I want you to send it, and it's going to be in my self-custody wallet. So this is fundamentally how all addresses are working within crypto. And the BIP32 process, which was invented mostly in the world of Bitcoin, has been adopted by just about every other crypto that exists.
Grant, can we talk about fungible versus non-fungible tokens in these databases?
So when we talk about fungibility, it's oftentimes in the world of like commodities. If you think about gas, right? When you go get gas, you don't say, if I go to this particular gas station or that particular gas station, there's not really a difference. Gas goes in your car and it just mixes together, and it really isn't differentiated in any way. And that is the essence of fungibility. If you can throw things into a pile and there's really no difference between anything that's in the pile, then you can say that those things that are in the pile are fungible. So gas really operates that way. Water kind of operates that way too. If you have your carrying your water bottle with you and you go to the water bottle, or you go to the water dispenser and you fill up your water bottle, there's not really a strong differentiation between one water that you get from somewhere and one water you get from somewhere else. Obviously there's nuance if it's filtered or whatever, but like once it's in the bottle, it's kind of all mixes together and you can't really tell the difference between them. Non-fungibility is when that doesn't work. So if I were to throw a bunch of stuff into a pile and I can easily tell one thing from another, then those things are non-fungible. So collectible Pokemon cards would be a good example of this. You know, your Charizard or your Squirtle. Those two cards are not the same, and they don't just go into a pile. One is definitely different from the other, and you can tell them apart, and they are fundamentally not just the same. Now, if you had all of the same card and you threw them in a pile, those would be fungible. So there is some nuance to exactly how this would work, because if you have the ability to print many of the same thing and you could throw them in a pile, you could say that those that are in the pile are kind of fungible, but this is what we mean by fungible, non-fungible. if you can't tell the difference between them when you throw them in a pile, then they've got that aspect. So non-fungible means they are easily differentiable from another.
And when you go to a bank, you can think about this in terms of some of the services that regular banks provide. You can go deposit your paycheck, and or you can go, dump your penny jar, little ceramic piglet out on the counter, and you don't necessarily want them to put all of those pennies, nickels, quarters, and dimes in a box and go hold on to it for you. You can get identical ones back. Those are fungible tokens. But when you take the deed to your house, or grandma's wedding ring, or other particular items of sentimental value, and place them in a safe deposit box, those are irreplaceable, and you're putting them, you're securing them, um, in a safe deposit box with an expectation of being able to go back and get that particular item back. So when I think of NFTs, in some ways I'm often thinking this is a safety deposit box. And this was it's an important thing for public peer-to-peer databases to be able to do, to be able um, to be able to transmit both types of these tokens, or these I get tokens or coins is a good way to phrase it. But anyway, that's the difference between NFTs, and some people might think, oh, NFTs are pictures, um, but that was part of a growing understanding that having a green parakeet with starry eyes, um, represented something that was individual and not replaceable um, by XCH or BTC or whatever coin that there's the meme coins, etc. Um, but replaceable fungible tokens on the network.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Like even in the world of Bitcoin, where we would traditionally think of all the tokens that exist in the Bitcoin network as being fungible. Some people took this a step further and said that they are not all the same. There are certain coins in the Bitcoin network which are rarer and that are more valuable. So you can kind of think about that as if you have a penny and it says that it's from 1972 and it's got a little R on it and the picture is reversed. Well, that's not just any old penny. That is a very particular penny, and it has extra special value because it's got all those things that I just listed off. So it would cease to be just any old penny that's fungible, and it now has become a rare penny that has special value because of its date or its the whatever is written on top of it. And so some people have taken that to the world of crypto and said that there can be rare coins, that there can be rare satoshis that exist in the network, that exist and that are fundamentally non-fungible, and they've looked at very specific properties and said this is what makes them rare. So yes, we've got this idea of NFTs, which people have traditionally thought of as pictures or whatever, but yeah, it can be anything that actually makes them fundamentally differentiable from one thing or another.
Well, and you think about, we have serial numbers on dollars, but not necessarily serial numbers on coins. And part of what gets interesting, whenever you're not trusting the engraving or the stamping of some physical object, but it's in a database. If there's not a serial number, how do you make sure that, say, there's only 21 million in a supply? And I'm not sure how that's done in the UTXO model, but these are some of the issues that are implicit in the creation of these public databases, and why it's important to have the ability to both send uh, specific tokens, but also to have tokens that are anonymous and interchangeable, and yet to be able to verify the number or how they were introduced into that network.
So we covered a bunch of ground. We talked about how crypto is this peer-to-peer network, that there are these computers that are out there that are fundamentally running the network called nodes. We talked about mempool, which is where all of the transactions that are going to get written to the database are waiting, how those waiting transactions are swooped up and put into a block, and also what the block consists of. It consists of these payments that are happening between different parties. And the way that you make those payment addresses is that there is no centralized party that does that, that you do that on your own, and you do it with some randomness. And then there's this thing that you remember that fundamentally allows you to create all of the addresses that are going to be yours. And those addresses are controlled by the keys that you have to keep safe and secure, that allow those coins to be moved around. And whoever is in control of those keys is fundamentally in control of those particular coins. And this is what crypto is. And there are many instances of it. Bitcoin was one of the first, and it has a particular set of properties that we've described, and that is repeated amongst many of these. So if you're ever thinking about Ethereum or Solana or any of the other more exotic types of coins that are out there, they are borrowing a lot of these same concepts. And this is the basic definition of crypto. So now that you have these ideas firmly in mind, this is the way that you can think about almost every crypto that's out there. Is they're doing this peer-to-peer process. There are more or less participants in a particular crypto network, and the more participants there is, that we would refer to that as it is more decentralized. Because if all of the participants are doing fundamentally the same thing in the network, then the network is generally resilient by the number of participants in it. So if there are fewer participants in it, you could imagine that if there's only 3 people that are in a particular crypto network, if all 3 of them go offline, that crypto network is gone. But if there are 300,000 or 3 million participants in the network, it is very hard to envision how all 300,000 or 300 million participants would all go offline simultaneously. And so it's a last important concept to remember, is that the strength of the network is in the number of participants, and that number of participants that are in the network is noted by its decentralization. And it's usually that thing which most cryptos are trying to maximize, is that they want a lot of people participating in the network, and they want it to be really, really resilient. It comes at a cost, though. The more people that are participating, each of them have to do the same set of work. And so you'll often hear criticisms on very decentralized networks, is that they're inefficient, or that they're using a lot of electricity, or that they're wasteful. But that's an aspect of having a lot of people participating in the network and it being resilient. You can think of all of these copies of the database. If that database goes away, then the value that you had locked away in those Bitcoin would be gone if those databases are lost. So think about decentralization as the level of replication, so that your money is never lost. If you think about, if you were to go bank with a very small little country bank and it burns down, everything that they recorded would have been lost, because there's only one copy of their database, and it's in that one little country bank that exists. And this used to happen in times past. That little bank would get robbed, or that little bank would burn down, and then the people who had their money stored there, it would be lost irrevocably. So Bitcoin and decentralized networks eliminate that risk by spreading this database completely across the entire world, decentralizing that database in a way that ensures that the value that is stored in the network isn't lost, by having a lot of people participating in it, a lot of people running those full nodes, and a lot of people having a copy of the database, so that that record of you having control of a certain amount of Bitcoin or crypto is not lost over time.
When I think about crypto sometimes too, I like to also remind myself that when I do go to a bank, maybe I'm going to talk to a loan officer, but usually I'm going to a window to speak to a teller. And the reason that we call the person who stands on the other side of that window a teller is because they're going to tell you a story, and you trust them for the technology, or you're placing trust in them that they're going to tell you a story that's true when it comes to your finances. And um, and that's essentially what money is. It's a story that we believe in, and we're looking for technological solutions that can tell us a story that we're all participating and sharing in, that we believe in. But we are at the close of the episode. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad that Grant, that we tackled, some very broad topics here, but it's interesting to get into what is the basis of this strange revolution called cryptocurrency is. For those who are listening to us on X, thanks for tuning in to us live. You can find us also on YouTube. We record all of our shows there. And if you enjoyed what you hear, if you enjoy FOMO, find us over there on YouTube at the FOMO Show, and subscribe to us. Give us a like. And we'll keep trying to put out good information. Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, Lucas.